You might think of Rome as a city of heroes, philosophers, and powerful emperors. But what if I told you that one of those emperors hosted nightly lotteries where the grand prize was death, that his bedroom functioned as a brothel, and he worshipped a black meteorite, calling it the sun god? This isn't fiction. This is the life and reign of Elagabalus, a boy who was handed the throne at 14, and in just 4 years, shattered Rome's dignity so thoroughly that senators tried to erase his name from history. But history cannot be deleted. This is the story of a child who became emperor, of a fanatic who destroyed tradition, of a tyrant who turned his power into farce. This is the story of Elagabalus, and it will shock you. Elagabalus was born around the year 203 AD in the city of Emesa, in the Roman province of Syria. His birth name was Varius Avitus Bassianus. He belonged to a powerful and deeply religious priestly family of Arab-Syrian origin. His mother, Julia Soemias, and his grandmother, Julia Misa, were members of the imperial Severan dynasty. Most crucially, his great-uncle was Emperor Septimius Severus, and his cousin was the reigning Emperor Caracalla. What set young Elagabalus apart from other Roman aristocrats was his role as the hereditary high priest of the god Elagabal, a local sun deity whose worship revolved around a sacred black stone believed to have fallen from the sky, most likely a meteorite. This god was not part of the traditional Roman pantheon, but in Emesa, his cult was central. From a very young age, Elagabalus was dressed in silk robes, anointed with perfumes, and trained in leading rituals before the stone idol. His identity as a priest shaped every aspect of his upbringing. In 217 AD, the assassination of Caracalla and the rise of the soldier emperor Macrinus changed everything. Julia Misa, furious that her family had been pushed from power, devised a plan to restore her bloodline to the imperial throne. She moved back to Emesa, where her grandson Elagabalus was still serving as high priest of the sun god. Using her vast wealth and influence, she began spreading rumors that Elagabalus was in fact the illegitimate son of Caracalla, a lie designed to give him a claim to the throne. The Syrian legions, still loyal to the Severan dynasty and fond of Caracalla, proved easy to sway. In 218 AD, when Elagabalus was just 14 years old, the soldiers proclaimed him emperor in open revolt against Macrinus. Julia Misa financed the entire uprising, promising bonuses and promotions to those who supported her grandson. The boy priest was paraded in the garments of his god, holding the sacred stone aloft, as a symbol of divine favor. The message was clear. Elagabalus was not only a rightful heir but also a chosen of the gods. His supporters framed his rise not just as a political restoration, but as a religious revolution. Macrinus attempted to suppress the rebellion, but his forces were defeated near Antioch. Elagabalus, still a child, had become the ruler of the Roman Empire. He and his entourage marched toward Rome, bringing with them the cult of Elagabal, and a promise to reshape Roman religion and society around their foreign god. From the very beginning, the Senate and Roman elite viewed the new emperor with suspicion. A Syrian boy, raised as a priest of a foreign deity, ruling over Rome. This was not simply unusual. It was threatening. What none of them could yet know was how far Elagabalus would go in dismantling Roman traditions and norms in the name of his god, and his own pleasure. When Elagabalus entered Rome in 219 AD, he did not attempt to conform to Roman customs or hide his background. Instead, he openly promoted the cult of the Syrian sun god Elagabal above all other Roman deities. One of his first official acts as emperor was to construct a grand temple on the Palatine Hill dedicated to his god. He ordered the sacred black stone, the meteorite from Emesa, to be brought to Rome and installed as the central object of worship. Elagabalus declared that the god Elagabal was superior to Jupiter, the chief Roman deity. He forced senators and Roman priests to attend public rituals honoring the foreign god, violating centuries of tradition and religious protocol. Roman citizens were shocked and offended. The emperor went so far as to marry the black stone to the Roman goddess Vesta in a symbolic wedding ceremony. This act was seen as sacrilegious and deeply offensive to traditional Roman sensibilities. At the same time, Elagabalus began displaying increasingly erratic and provocative behavior in court. He replaced high-ranking Roman officials with his personal favorites, often selected from his circle of priests or from people he favored for personal reasons. Merit and experience were disregarded in favor of loyalty and flattery. The imperial court became chaotic, and many respected administrators resigned or were dismissed. Elagabalus also began introducing Eastern customs and dress into Roman political life. He frequently appeared in public wearing silk robes, heavy makeup, and golden jewelry, including earrings and wigs. This was in direct violation of Roman ideals of masculinity and civic dignity. Senators were forced to sit through ceremonies that resembled Eastern mystic rituals rather than Roman state affairs. His private life soon became a public scandal. Elagabalus openly referred to himself as a woman, preferred to be called empress instead of emperor, and took multiple male lovers, the most famous of whom was a charioteer named Hierocles. He reportedly attempted to have Hierocles legally recognized as his husband. According to Roman sources, Elagabalus even inquired with physicians about the possibility of undergoing gender reassignment surgery, though this cannot be confirmed. The emperor's behavior increasingly alienated the Senate, the military, and the Roman people. His disregard for Roman religion, traditions, and moral expectations caused widespread resentment. Meanwhile, Julia Maesa and Julia Soaemias, his grandmother and mother, attempted to control the situation from behind the scenes, but even they began to fear the consequences of his actions. By the end of 219 AD, just months into his reign in Rome, Elagabalus had already become one of the most controversial figures in Roman imperial history. His open defiance of Roman values, his religious reforms, and his chaotic court deeply unsettled the foundations of imperial stability. Behind the facade of divine enthusiasm, the empire was rapidly descending into disorder. By 220 AD, Elagabalus had alienated nearly every powerful institution in Rome. The Senate resented his religious policies and disregard for Roman tradition. The people were confused and scandalized by his behavior. But it was the Roman military, the Praetorian Guard in particular, that began to view him as a direct threat to the stability of the empire. The emperor's daily routines were unpredictable and increasingly offensive to Roman sensibilities. He installed his god Elagabal as the chief deity of the state and ordered that all other gods, including Jupiter and Mars, be considered subordinate. Public sacrifices were carried out not in traditional Roman style, but using Syrian chants and rituals. The black stone, carried in a golden chariot, was paraded through the streets of Rome in theatrical processions, with the emperor dancing in front of it dressed as a priest. Even more alarming was Elagabalus' growing obsession with sexuality and personal spectacle. He staged elaborate banquets and orgies in the imperial palace. He offered high political positions to men based solely on physical attraction, not competence. He frequently appeared in public dressed in women's clothing, with makeup and wigs, and demanded to be referred to as she in court documents. Roman sources, particularly Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta, claim that Elagabalus established a senate of women, composed of prostitutes and dancers, and consulted them on state affairs. Though likely exaggerated, these accounts reflect the shock and disapproval felt by Rome's elite. The emperor also declared himself the high priest of all cults, merging Roman religious offices into his own personal role, effectively dismantling the state religion. In private, Elagabalus surrounded himself with magicians, astrologers, and eunuchs. He reportedly built hidden chambers in the palace where he indulged in role-play and sexual rituals. According to multiple ancient accounts, he forced dignitaries to participate in bizarre ceremonies, including dances and humiliating performances, under threat of execution or exile. His disrespect for the military was particularly dangerous. Elagabalus frequently insulted officers, stripped them of honors, and replaced them with men from his inner circle who had no military training. He reportedly tried to replace Roman military standards with images of his god, leading to open defiance among soldiers. In an attempt to stabilize his image, Elagabalus married a Roman noblewoman named Aquilia Severa, a Vestal virgin. This act was seen as sacrilegious. Vestals were sworn to celibacy, and any sexual relationship was punishable by death. The emperor claimed that the union was symbolic, meant to merge Roman tradition with his new religious order. The public saw it as another act of desecration. Julia Misa, alarmed by the deepening crisis, began to fear that her family's power was in jeopardy. She shifted her attention to Elagabalus' cousin, Alexander Severus, a quiet and disciplined teenager she saw as a more suitable ruler. The Praetorian Guard, tired of the emperor's antics, began to turn their loyalty toward Alexander. By late 221 AD, the court was divided. On one side stood Elagabalus, increasingly isolated, consumed by his rituals and personal pursuits. On the other stood Julia Misa, maneuvering behind the scenes to preserve the dynasty by preparing Alexander as a replacement. The empire was no longer just scandalized, it was on the verge of rebellion. By early 222 AD, tensions within the imperial court reached a breaking point. Elagabalus, increasingly paranoid and erratic, sensed the growing threat posed by his cousin Alexander Severus. Although Alexander was officially adopted as Caesar under pressure from Julia Misa, Elagabalus remained unwilling to share power or acknowledge his cousin's popularity among the people and the military. In an attempt to maintain control, Elagabalus tried to remove Alexander from succession. He dismissed loyal officers in the Praetorian Guard and attempted to replace them with his own appointees. These efforts only deepened the resentment within the ranks. The Guard viewed Alexander as a source of hope, a disciplined and Roman-educated alternative to the chaos of Elagabalus. Julia Misa, anticipating a coup, took careful steps to win the loyalty of the Praetorians. She distributed large sums of money among the guards and presented Alexander as a protector of Roman traditions. Elagabalus, sensing betrayal, withdrew deeper into the palace, becoming more isolated from state affairs. He increased his reliance on eunuchs, priests, and sycophants, creating a closed inner circle that filtered all information. The breaking point came in March of 222. Elagabalus summoned a meeting of the Praetorian Guard and demanded that they swear an oath of loyalty exclusively to him, excluding Alexander. The soldiers refused. In response, Elagabalus ordered several guards arrested. This triggered an immediate backlash. The Praetorians stormed the imperial palace. Elagabalus attempted to flee with his mother, Julia Soaemias, but both were quickly captured. According to contemporary sources, the two were dragged from their hiding place, stripped, and publicly executed in a brutal display of rejection. Their bodies were beheaded and desecrated. Elagabalus' corpse was paraded through the streets of Rome, his limbs mutilated and face unrecognizable. His body was then thrown into the Tiber River, an act symbolizing complete erasure and rejection. Julia Soaemias suffered a similar fate. The Senate and the people gave no resistance to the guards' actions. In the days following his death, all official images and inscriptions of Elagabalus were destroyed or removed. His name was subjected to damnatio memoriae, a Roman practice of erasing a disgraced person from all public record. Statues were torn down, coins were melted, and documents were edited to remove any trace of his rule. Alexander Severus was proclaimed emperor shortly after. He immediately reversed many of Elagabalus' policies, restored the traditional gods to their temples, and reinstated Roman religious customs. The cult of Elagabal was dissolved in Rome, and the Black Stone was quietly returned to Emesa. The empire returned to a facade of normalcy. However, the memory of Elagabalus persisted, not because of honor, but because of horror. Historians continued to write about him, not as a ruler but as a warning. His reign had lasted only 4 years, but its impact endured for centuries. The legacy of Elagabalus remains one of the most controversial and debated in Roman imperial history. His reign, lasting from 218 to 222 AD, is remembered less for administrative decisions or military campaigns, and more for personal conduct that violated nearly every Roman norm, religious, cultural, and political. Ancient historians portrayed Elagabalus as a symbol of decadence and madness. Writers like Cassius Dio, Herodian, and the author of the Historia Augusta documented his reign in harsh, often moralizing tones. Their accounts emphasized his disregard for Roman traditions, obsession with luxury, and radical sexuality. Some of these reports may have been exaggerated or influenced by political motives, but the consistency across sources suggests that his behavior was indeed extreme for Roman standards. One reason Elagabalus stands out is the open defiance of Roman religious and gender expectations. No other emperor had ever elevated a foreign god above Jupiter, or demanded the Roman elite participate in rituals foreign to their identity. No previous ruler had so publicly blurred gender roles, appearing in women's clothing, referring to himself as female, and seeking a sexual identity at odds with Roman masculinity. Even in the tolerant and diverse world of the Roman Empire, these actions were seen as too radical to accept. For centuries, Elagabalus was remembered primarily through the lens of disgrace. He was categorized alongside Caligula and Nero as an example of how absolute power can lead to moral collapse. In Christian writings of the late Roman and medieval periods, he was depicted as a warning about pagan perversion and godlessness. However, modern historians have taken a more nuanced view. While acknowledging his erratic behavior, they also consider the political environment of the time, the biases of ancient sources, and the unique challenges he faced as a teenage ruler thrust into power by family ambition. Some scholars suggest that Elagabalus was a product of manipulation, a religious figure used by others for political ends, who then spiraled out of control when granted unchecked authority. In recent decades, Elagabalus has become a subject of interest in discussions about gender and identity in antiquity. His self-presentation, expressions of gender fluidity, and rejection of binary norms have led some to reinterpret him as a historical figure challenging established systems. In this context, he is viewed not just as a failed emperor, but as someone who exposed the limits of Roman tolerance. Nevertheless, Elagabalus remains a cautionary tale. His inability to navigate the political realities of Rome, his detachment from military and administrative duties, and his prioritization of personal pleasure over statecraft all contributed to his downfall. His short reign is a vivid example of how personal identity, if wielded without political wisdom or restraint, can provoke violent backlash. Elagabalus did not fall solely because of who he was, but because of how he ruled. The Roman Empire had room for eccentricity, but not for instability. And when the emperor became the source of chaos, the system rejected him entirely. Today, Elagabalus occupies a strange place in history, both a symbol of excess and an object of re-examination. His name evokes scandal, but also opens the door to questions about religion, power, and identity in the ancient world. He was a teenage priest made emperor. He was a ruler who defied gods and genders. And in just 4 years, he became a legend for all the reasons Rome wished to forget. Elagabalus did not build monuments that survived the centuries. He did not conquer new lands or reform the empire's bureaucracy. His legacy is not measured in laws or battles, but in the shockwaves his reign sent through Roman identity. He exposed the fault lines of an empire that prided itself on tradition but often struggled to contain change. His downfall was not simply the collapse of a ruler, it was the violent rejection of a system that had allowed the wrong person to rise for the wrong reasons. Behind the scandal and excess was a deeper lesson, that even in the most powerful empire on earth, legitimacy could be lost in a moment if the ruler lost the trust of the people, the army, and the gods. Elagabalus remains a mirror, one that reflects the contradictions of empire, the fragility of order, and the price of confusing spectacle for leadership. His story is not just about Rome. It's about what happens when personal identity overwhelms public responsibility, when power becomes performance, when the state becomes the stage. And in that sense, Elagabalus still speaks to us. The case of Elagabalus continues to fascinate historians because it forces a confrontation with the limits of Roman power, tolerance, and identity. Few emperors challenged the expectations of their office as radically as he did. And fewer still were erased from memory so deliberately by the institutions that once elevated them. Elagabalus reminds us that the Roman Empire was not an infallible machine. It was a system of human actors, rituals, loyalties, and compromises. When those elements broke down, the system cracked. His rise to power was the result of dynastic manipulation, religious symbolism, and military dissatisfaction, not merit or popular support. His fall, just as swift, revealed how fragile imperial legitimacy truly was when detached from discipline, structure, and shared values. His reign demonstrates the dangers of conflating personal identity with political authority. Elagabalus viewed the Roman state as a platform for his religious convictions and gender expressions, not as a structure requiring governance and consensus. In doing so, he inverted the core Roman concept of mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors, which emphasized continuity, restraint, and civic responsibility. To the Roman elite, Elagabalus represented not only disorder, but inversion, religious inversion, gender inversion, moral inversion. The Senate could tolerate cruelty, excess, and even madness, but it could not tolerate chaos that lacked a political objective. That was the line Elagabalus crossed. The way his memory was treated after death is also instructive. The practice of damnatio memoriae, to erase a person from official memory, was rare and reserved for those considered especially dangerous to the Roman order. The fact that Elagabalus was subjected to it shows how deeply his reign threatened the ideological foundation of empire. His name was deleted, his portrait smashed, and his reign rewritten. Yet the erasure was never complete. Even in damnation, he survived. Roman historians could not resist recording the scandal, and generations of writers, both hostile and curious, returned to his story as a symbol of extremes. He became a fixed point in the mental map of Roman decline, not because of military defeat or economic collapse, but because of cultural dissonance and social upheaval. In that sense, Elagabalus is not simply a case study in imperial failure. He is a lens through which to view the limits of conformity. His short reign tested how far Rome could stretch before it snapped. It answered the question, how much divergence could one man embody before the empire rejected him entirely? In the end, Elagabalus was not overthrown because he was Syrian or young or unorthodox. He was overthrown because he refused to play by the rules of power. In the Roman world, power was not absolute. It was conditional. And when the conditions were broken, when gods were replaced, when roles were reversed, when order was mocked, power itself withdrew. What remains today is not just a tragic figure, but a mirror for how societies deal with difference, and what they are willing to destroy in order to preserve the illusion of control.